Hi, good evening. Thank you everyone for joining us here this evening to celebrate the Stillwater Public Library Foundation at our virtual Pi Day event. I'm Alicia Gordon-Macalis. I am the foundation manager, and I'm honored to be here as a part of the foundation and to be here with you this evening. Tonight, we will bring you foundation highlights from the past year and feature The Science of Wine with Chris Kohtz from Domacin Wine Bar and Wine Shop. A highlight of working at the foundation is the opportunity to work with a dedicated and passionate board of directors. I'm pleased to now introduce Sean Glazer, the Stillwater Public Library Foundation president. He is vice president, bank services director at First State Bank and Trust, and he is a resident of Stillwater and a very active member of his the community where he lives with his wife and children. Welcome, Sean.
Hi, Alicia. Thank you so much. I appreciate you kicking us off here. So a little bit about me, or my brief story for why I love serving the library here. As Alicia mentioned, I live in Stillwater with my wife and 2 kids. And growing up, I was taken to the library regularly by my mom, and I'm very thankful for that. And I love taking my kids to the library. We get to browse the books, pick out all sorts of different fun stories. We bring them home, we get to read. And, reading with your kids is really something magical. So I'm very fortunate to be helping out the library through the foundation. And the library gives so much back to me, I think, just by the amount of resources that we have there. So that's why I got involved. And I think it's really important that somebody's willing to lead the foundation as president, and I am currently doing that. Really, it's been an honor, and I've got such a great team here that's working with me to reach our goals. I would like to thank the entire board really for helping out of the foundation. Next slide here. So as you can see, here's the leadership side of things. So I'm the president. We've got Summer as vice president, Dustin as treasurer, and Paige as secretary. If you want to go to the next slide here, the other board members that we've got is Anne, Brownlee, Ryan Collar, Amber, Sandy Ellis, Roger Funk, John Gray. John, I saw your wife just the other day at the library. That was absolutely wonderful. Kevin Sandstrom, and then Mark Prundle serves on the library foundation board with us. No voting rights, but he's definitely a liaison and is able to communicate with us about the library needs, so we can work very closely with him. All right, next slide. All right, so as we're looking at things here, like every organization, this last year of 2020 has brought just tons of challenges due to COVID-19, not just for the foundation, but for the library as well. I mean, the foundation, we had to cancel our Pi Day event. And then sadly, I mean, I know many of you love Light a Spark like I do, and we had to cancel that without any fireworks, not able to get together. The community safety is so important to us though. But we really love the community, and we rely on the community for most of our funding. Now, we had the great honor of Rich Summer reaching out to us with the offer to host For the Love of the Library, which was our first virtual event. It was an incredible gift and opportunity for the foundation. Rich dedicated so much of his time to help bring the event to life. We were just overwhelmed with the support and contributions from everybody. And really, we had the opportunity to learn a lot this last year as we switched gears from a live event to a virtual event, and then moving forward with all of our general work of meeting in person and live meetings to virtual meetings. So there was lots of stuff that we ended up learning last year. Now, the foundation really got its launch back in January of 2008, if I can speak correctly. That's always good. Under the leadership of Dick Hulsman. For those of you that may know Dick Hulsman, he is such a wonderful man, or was such a wonderful man, and just had completed the expansion of the library and to meet the growing needs of our community. So over the years, because of donor support, the foundation has been able to provide over 900,000 to the Stillwater Public Library to enhance materials, programs, services of the library, which really we couldn't do this without your help and your support of our donors. So thank you so very much for that. Now, because of all the support and everything, especially in 2020, the foundation and the library is really proud that we funded things like Hearing Loops, a volunteer coordinator, portable Wi-Fi hotspots, and then Sunday hours for when those have been able to do, and children's programming. If you haven't checked out the portable Wi-Fi hotspots, those are amazing, and they're really serving our community well for those that aren't able to have Wi-Fi at their home or internet access at their home. So I'm definitely proud and happy that the foundation was able to help the library bring that to life. More recently, the board has voted to expand our support by adding preservation of the historic building and grounds to our bylaws, which allows us to help maintain the integrity of the historic building, keeping it safe for the community and continue to seek the legacy of learning and education that Andrew Carnegie started with his gift of $27,500 so many years ago. As you guys know, we've got such a wonderful library, and I am very happy to say that the foundation made this change so we can support the library and just maintain the historic building because it is such a beautiful building. So we're really proud about the impact that the foundation has made, but clearly we cannot do it alone. As I said before, it takes the entire community. The library is largely funded by the city of Stillwater, but it also relies on additional support by the foundation, its donors, the community volunteers, and board members. We also appreciate the support of the Friends of the Stillwater Public Library. That organization holds 2 annual book sales a year just to benefit the library. I mean, how fortunate are we to have an organization besides the foundation that says, you know what, we love our library, we want to show that support. So as you're kind of looking at the screen, we got some finances on there. And, this last year was a little over 12,000 just for materials. And I apologize because I got to check my notes. It's easier to look at paper notes instead of what's on the screen here for that. 18,000 programming. The programming looks a little different. There's been a lot of virtual stuff that the foundation has been able to support the library to do. Instead of having the programs in person, there's been more stuff virtually. But thankfully, the library still wants to hold wonderful education programs for our community. Of course, there was a little over 23,000 for building improvements and restoration. That's been huge. And as I mentioned, the portable hotspots. So that is also that's actually a 5-year commitment that the foundation did there. So just a little bit about that for the finances. I thoroughly look forward to seeing the foundation grow. If you want to go to the next slide, sorry, I forgot about that. But we're looking at seeing the foundation grow and throwing or having more support for the library and really keeping our library and our local community such a world-class library, a hub for education and learning. So with that, I would like to turn it over here to the video, or Summer, I'm sorry. Summer, welcome.
Thank you. I believe we have a STEM video too that we can show with 3M Wizards. I'm not sure if that's going to work for us today.
the Stillwater Library today doing a dinosaur workshop for spring break, and I'm really excited to be out here because I really love bringing science to kids. It's really important to get them excited about it, and I've been doing this for 7 years now, and I do it because the kids really need to have an example of being excited about science. And so things like this at a library are huge because you get to meet the kids where they are, and I'm really glad to be here for that.
Watching something carefully, listening really carefully, right? Where maybe you can hear where the ball lands or when it lands. Yep. Do that one. Yeah, use evidence to support your decisions, right? So science is based on data, so we're going to collect some data. And this is my favorite. Yes. Work with and learn things from others.
Wow. Aren't the 3M Wizards an amazing example of the programming for STEM that's available at the Stillwater Public Library? Good afternoon. I'm Summer Seidenkrans, Chair of the Events and Marketing Committee, and we're glad you're here with us today. We are so thankful for our generous corporate and individual donors who allow us to support the library's programming, especially for children and young adults. The foundation has traditionally held 3 events each year, with the first being a donor thank you, which is our new Pi Day event today. Moving forward, we plan to celebrate everything STEM, STEAM, and perhaps actual pie. You can pick your favorite flavor, and especially you during this event. Light a Spark, our signature event each July 4th on the Johnson Terrace, is again in question this year due to COVID-19. But please stay tuned. We're closely paying attention to official restrictions and will again host this fun evening if we are able. If we don't fear it, it'll be back next year. Lastly, for the love of the library, our big fall event each year offers a variety of entertaining and learning opportunities. As Sean mentioned earlier, we were absolutely thrilled to have around 300 of you join us last November for our very first virtual event. And please stay tuned to our social media to learn more about the exciting event we are planning for later this year. We welcome your input, comments, and especially appreciate your presence at our events. Your patronage, contributions, and love for the Stillwater Public Library help us make this a world-class library. And now, I'd like to introduce Chris Kohtz from my favorite wine bar in Stillwater, with its wonderful ambiance and equally outstanding wines and menu. Chris worked in public media and broadcasting for 26 years, all the while nurturing a love for food and wine. He was the owner of Stillwater's The Wedge and Wheel for 5 years and is currently focused on wine and wine education. Chris is the ideal person to lead us on a lively journey through the world of wine. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Summer, and it's just it's a blessing to be involved with this process. Like Sean said, I grew up in my small town in Nebraska with a great public library system, and I was the kid who would hop on his bike and ride across town on those summer days just so I could bring new books home. And so I just can't speak enough to the value of keeping a library going, even in this digital age. You know, the libraries continue to evolve, and Stillwater is just so very fortunate to have such a great show of support. And at the restaurant and at the wine shop, we're just down the street. And so it's very, very important for us. And what a lot of people will say is a tourism town like Stillwater, that we really feel like we're part of the local fabric in the community. At the Wedge and Wheel, and now in my current role, education is a big part of what we do. And in fact, we're going to continue to invest in how we can kind of carry the wine education part along with being a restaurant and a wine bar and a wine shop, because it's just very important to the owners and to myself and to others to be more than a restaurant. And so we're going to take some time today just to kind of quickly go through some of the myths and the truths, the most common things that I hear, that we hear at the restaurant or on the job when working with wine. So we're going to do a little quick uncorking of some wines and truths. So I want to start with a quick truth first, and that's a kind of an obvious one. That is, how do you say the name of the restaurant? I've already heard it a couple of different ways today, and it's a very common question. I gave my friends and owners a hard time about kind of getting control over the name of the restaurant many, many years ago. And it's been said about every way you can possibly imagine. So how do you say that funny looking word with a little mark over the C? So some of the common things that we've heard are, is it Domacin? That's probably the most common. I often hear a lot, is it Domacin? Because they see that little schwa and you think that must be it. Or is it Domacin, which is the one that, if you don't know, I probably hear the least. Well, the answer is the last one. It's Domacin, like the chin on your face. It's actually a Serbian word. It has a connection to one of the owners, the proprietors of Domacin. And if you know, we're all good library fans. We know our words and our vocabulary. If you think of the word domicile, you can kind of get the sense of where Domacin might come from. But in Serbia, it means kind of the host or the head of the household. And in the restaurant sense, it always just sort of means you're kind of always welcome in our home. So from now on, you can tell all your friends, you can correct them over a glass of wine for dinner next week, that it's Domacin and not Domacin. Anyway, let's get some serious stuff going on with wine right now. First, a disclaimer. Everything that I'm about to tell you today is absolutely true. And it's also mostly false, because you're gonna find out there's a lot of subjectivity that goes on with a lot of these things, but we're gonna try and sort some of that out for you today. So we're going to start with the first myth, and this is one of the most common we hear, and those are some really old, dusty bottles, or maybe it looks like your basement in Stillwater after a particularly wet spring thaw, we'll see. But the number one myth is that all wine gets better with age. And just like this poor guy who probably could have used a little more wine to help his preservation, the answer is generally no. But you know, some wines do get better with age. Age does certainly matter. And it's also true, and probably more true, and this is just an economic reality, that every year, more and more, really most wines are made to be drunk right off the store shelf, or fresh, as they might say. But you got to keep in mind too that, you know, wine has already been aging by the time you get it. It's not harvested in September, put into the bottle in October, and then handed right out to you. It probably sits at the winemaker for 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, several years. It all just kind of depends. So wine has already been aging in proper conditions before that bottle ever gets into your hands. And the truth again is that for many wines, aging just means getting old. So a lot of wines really, by the time you get them in the store or at the wine shop or wherever, they're kind of being, intended to be opened and poured into your glass. In fact, there are a lot of wines that are kind of intended to be drunk younger, and maybe subjectively said even better. So I'm going to throw out a few quick examples here. Pinot Gris or Grigio, it's the same grape, but depending on where in the world it's made, they go by the different names. But it's a young, fresh, tart white wine, and it's not typically a wine that you would see age very long, so you can always trust that to be pretty good. Moscato, the sparkling wine, and a lot of the fizzy wines, that's generally going to be true, but you'll see some exceptions to that too. And then wines like Sauvignon Blanc, and these are going to notice a lot of white wines, and Prosecco. But there's some red wines too, like Rosso di Montalcino, or some of the young red blends and Sangioveses from northern Italy. Generally speaking, these are wines that the winemakers want you to drink early. Why? It helps them from a revenue standpoint so that they can make those wines that need to sit down and age for months or years, because those wines aren't making them any money. So they need some wines that are meant to be drank right away. Rosé, certainly you don't see too many people drinking 10-year-old rosé. A lot of rosés are really meant to be drank fresh in the season. In fact, the 2020 wines that we're already going to start seeing at the wine shop, the only 2020 wines will probably be rosé. It'll be another year before we start seeing 2020 reds, for example. Beaujolais Nouveau, I'm not personally a fan, but that's probably the youngest, freshest red out there. It is that rare exception of it's harvested, made, put in the right bottle, and meant to get right into your hands. It's not something we do at Domacin, but there are some fans of the kind of the hobby of chasing after Nouveau Beaujolais. Zinfandel, there's a common grape that a lot of people like. It's a smooth or it's a juicy red. Again, you don't hear too many people talking about drinking a 10-year-old bottle of Zinfandel. You drink what you buy. Cheap wine, and by that I mean your $2 bottles at the end cap and the sale bins in the stores. If they're selling it that cheaply, chances are it needs to get a move on, or it just wasn't meant to hang around for very long anyway. Same with smooth wines, those really heavy, oaky, simple, not dry in your mouth red wines. Chances are those also don't have the structure and the technique behind them to cause them to age well. So if you like those wines, you're probably buying them at a pretty good price and drinking them right away. And again, the truth is that the majority of the wines on the store shelves or in the wine shop, they're really meant to be drunk now. Whether the vintage is 10 years old or it's 1 year old, the intention is if it's on the shelf, take it home and drink it. And at a good wine shop location, if you're talking to a person like me or anybody at your favorite local wine shop, you're going to have a relationship with a person that can say, oh, this one you want to put away for a while, or maybe this is when you need to get a move on. So always listen to and build those relationships. Another quick tip, not always true, and it kind of depends on where it's from and all that, but generally if it's a less expensive bottle, say under $30 or so, chances are you can just open that up and drink it right away without a lot of fuss. There are grapes that age really, really well, and I'm sure we've got some people online with us today that have a lot of experience with this, but there are some grapes that even need some age even after you bought it before you really want to get them open. My favorite grape, the king of the grapes in Italy, as they call it, is Nebbiolo. It's the grape that makes wines like Barolo and Barbaresco. Generally speaking, you can get Nebbiolo when it's 3 years old or so, but you might want to hang on to that for 5 or 6. And the best Barolos you can hang on to for 25 years, but not too many people sell it like that. But aging Nebbiolo helps. It kind of softens those mouth-drying tannins and kind of helps the whole wine come together. It just needs a little more time in the bottle. Wines with a lot of tannin, like Nebbiolo, Cab Franc, for example, can take some time. White wines that are really high in acid or sugar also have the kind of the structure to hang around for a long, long time. They'll age really well. They'll change and they'll evolve, but they're meant to age. So like I mentioned, these Barolo and Cab Franc. Spanish Tempranillo seems to just go on forever. I've tasted a Tempranillo that was almost 100 years old, and you couldn't have told me that it tasted as old as, say, a 5-year-old bottle of cheap American red. So then that leads us on to kind of myth 1A, and that is, and look at this old bottle. This is a bottle of 1999 Chardonnay, a French Chablis. Myth 1A is that wine that's white doesn't age very well. Well, many actually do. And actually, for the last couple of years, I've been all about drinking wines that are technically past their prime, and they're delicious, or at least they're just really interesting. But I'm a wine geek, and I'm sure many of us online today are too. A few examples, like the sweeter, the off-dry to sweet Rieslings, they literally can age for decades, and as they evolve, they start tasting like a real petrol quality. They change, they evolve. I'll drink any day a 15-year-old Riesling before I'll drink more fresh ones. It's just my kind of my personal taste. Fortified dessert wines, those with a lot of sugar in them, a lot of residual sugar, they can sit down for many, many decades. You'll find French Sauternes that ages out for 40, 50, 60, 70 years. Of course, they're very expensive and they're hard to find, but point is, there's a white wine that can take a lot of age. Again, wines that are high in acidity. Acidity is like to wine like salt in food. It's a protective. It keeps it going for a long, long time. Some examples of wines that you'll find, doesn't mean you have to age them, but that they can age well, are good French Chenin Blanc or Chardonnay, Viognier, white Bordeaux, which are made up of Sauvignon Blanc or Semillon, all can take a lot of age, and they become more interesting and more characterful when they do. I mentioned earlier that sparkling wines, generally drink them fresh. Vintage champagnes, we've all, watched Sean Connery as James Bond, extolling his knowledge of old vintages of champagne and knowing whether that one's ready to drink now or not. But it's true that champagne that is vintage champagne, meaning it's got a year that it was made on the bottle, some of those can age for a very, very long time. They deepen in color and texture, and they get really nutty tasting, and I just think they're fascinating. There are a lot of fun Spanish whites too that age really well, and that's kind of an obscure area. But again, come back to your wine shop and say, I'm interested in trying something. Just know that generally speaking, what you're going to find on a store shelf is not going to be a 25-year-old Spanish Cadella. You're probably not going to find that anywhere. But if you're lucky to run across one, you should try it. My wife and I were in Italy just not that long before COVID, and we were eating in a restaurant in Venice as an example, and they actually had a whole section on the list of old white wine, and they had Pinot Grigio on the list that was translated out to be wine for the adventuresome. And just looking at it and tasting it, could never tell you it was Pinot Grigio, but it was drinkable. So, sometimes if you're not sure about a wine and you don't want to throw it away, throw it in the back of your fridge, cellar, whatever, come back to it in a few years and just see what it's changed to. It might rot, it might be kind of fun. Myth number 2, she's had a bad night. I think there were some people at Domacin last night that probably feel this way this morning, in fact. The thing that I hear all the time in the restaurant and the wine shop is, do you have any wines that don't have any sulfites in them? Because sulfites give me headaches. And that's absolutely not the truth, unless you're in a tiny little percentage of the public. I'll talk about that in just a second. This guy had a rough night too, it looks like. For 95% of us, sulfites are not the problem in wine. And given the frequency with which I hear that question, chances are sulfites are not your problem either. So let's talk about sulfites just quickly. Every wine contains sulfites. It's natural. It's just part of the process. It's a product of the fermentation. That is changing the sugar in the wines into alcohol. Without sulfites, wines cannot age at all. They'll rot away. It's a necessary natural preservative. Some wines will rot in the bottle within a few weeks, a few months, a year. The Romans knew this a long time ago. They had processes for kind of making sure there was just a little bit of sulfite in the bottle or something similar to help the wine hang around for a while. There are winemakers that have to add a tiny, tiny little bit of sulfites, and we're talking, 10 parts, 15 parts per million into the bottle, but generally not your cause of the headache. So many of you online that know me know that I was heavily into cheese for a long, long time. Aged cheese, like good Parmigiano, actually can contain 10 times or more sulfites than a bottle of wine. And you might ask yourself, do you get a headache from that wine, but then you chow on a piece of cheese and you get cheese headaches? I'm guessing the answer is likely no. Again, sulfites do occur naturally in wine, but they're also added to as a preservative and also occur naturally in a lot of other very common things, like dried fruit. Dried apricots are one of the highest sources of sulfites. They occur in pickles, both naturally and as additives, analgesics, other medications, scallops. A plate full of broccoli will have an awful lot of sulfite in it, more than you're ever going to get in a glass of wine. Sugar beets, French fries, maple syrup, I could go on and on here, shrimp and crackers. Just seems like everything's got a little bit of sulfite in it. So what's going on with sulfites, and why do we all think it's the wine? Mostly because officials many years ago decided that you needed to label the presence of sulfites on a wine label. And of course we look at that and go, oh, that must be it because they're warning me about it. But you notice it doesn't say this wine contains sulfites and it will give you a headache. It's just a label that tells you that there's some naturally occurring and possibly a little bit of added sulfite in the bottle. So it is true that there are some people that can't have allergic reactions to sulfites. That is true. But that reaction is not a headache. It's an exacerbation of asthma or breathing issues. In fact, there have been a number of repeated studies recently that show that about 15% of the sufferers that had really chronic asthma had a strong reaction to a overly high, very, very high dose of sulfite. A dose of sulfite that would be far more, you'd have to drink bottles and bottles and bottles of wine. That would be a problem into itself. But the people that had normal doses actually had no reaction. So what's the cause? Why am I getting headaches when I drink wine? And I'll raise my hand here and say that even some of my favorite Italian red wines, when I'm sitting on the sofa watching a movie at night, I'll start having some of these other symptoms and sometimes a headache. So it could be allergies. wines are full of histamines. You got to remember that wine is a plant. It comes from a plant. All of the things are associated with that plant in the grape, on the air. Histamines are an important kind of healthy reaction in the body. It's telling you that something's going on and that your body is dealing with it. But some people do have reactions, and you can develop a histamine reaction to wine. Is that a bad thing? Well, it is if you have a really terrible reaction. But sometimes an allergy pill can solve that, and sometimes it just goes away. If it's allergy season and you're having a bad time of it, then allergy reactions to histamines in wine can actually be that much worse. It could be this kind of crazy thing, all of these chemical symbols, these molecular structures over here, that can be a problem, both from an allergy and just kind of a medical response reason. Tannin. Many of you have heard about tannin in wine, or a lot of people will say, well, I just don't like dry wine. When you talk about dry, you're not talking about the winemaker's definition of dry, which has to do with the sugar in the wine, but you're talking about it dries my mouth out. Those are the tannins. So tannins occur naturally in the skins and in the juice, in the stems and the seeds of the grapes. And if you want to try a great experiment sometime, get yourself a red grape and peel the skin off and try chewing just the skin. You'll get a full dose of what tannins are all about. And then try the pulp and you'll understand that there's virtually no tannin in there at all. And the two together balance out to be very important to the structure of wine. But again, it's that tannin that causes that cotton ball sensation in your mouth. But again, tannins occur in a lot of other things too, like your red berries, for example. I've been drinking a lot of tea lately, and you always get that mouth drying sensation from drinking tea. Nuts and cinnamon and cloves can, pomegranates certainly do. Can't speak to quince, but chocolate, again, it can kind of chalky dry your mouth out a little bit. Do you get a chocolate headache? Could be caffeine, might be tannins and chocolate. But here's really, honestly, and this is, science and anecdote, but what's the biggest cause of the headaches? It's good old water, but not what you think. It's because you don't have enough, especially when you're drinking astringent wine that's going to dry you out and increasing the alcohol in your body. You're dehydrated. It's a good rule of thumb, and few of us adhere to this, especially when we're out socially, because of the need to get up and go use the facilities maybe one time too frequently. But 1 glass of water for every glass of alcohol really does matter. I can drink an entire bottle of wine in a night as long as I drink an equivalent of water. If I have a couple of glasses of wine and no water, I start feeling pretty poorly pretty quickly. My mouth gets dry. I start getting a little headachy. I don't feel all that well. I'm not a happy drunk. I don't feel too well drunk. So keep up on your water intake and give that a try. And I think you'll be surprised. Otherwise, maybe chat with your medical professional and see, but try that 1-to-1 with water and alcohol. It really matters. All right. Myth number 3, very fancy decanter here. Myth is that you should always decant your wine. This is, I get a stronger opinion about this with each passing year. And the answer really is no. Especially old wine. So let's talk about decanting. And what about this schmutz in the glass, sediment? Well, sediment's not a great thing. And why is it there? Well, it's a natural byproduct of the winemaking. You'll hear the terms of unfined and unfiltered. Some winemakers will choose not to fine out or filter out the finest sediments in the wine. And as a wine sits, a red wine sits, especially an older wine, those solids can settle out in the glass. And when you go to pour that bottle, if you're just very cavalier about it, you grab it and you dump it into your glass, you're going to get sediment, especially from the last pour out of that bottle. And that can be a little gritty and a little tannic, very mouth drying, like we said, and not all that pleasant. So that's one reason to decant, but you need to know how to do it. Decanting very slowly, making sure you turn the bottle up slowly and leaving the sediment in the bottle. So why wouldn't you decant just everything? Because when you decant wine, you are adding oxygen and starting a process of agitating the wine and changing its atmosphere. And when a wine is old, it's fragile and you cannot go backwards in time. And so if you just think, oh, this is an old bottle, I need to decant it for this in it, and you go sludge right into the bottle, don't be surprised sometimes if within a half an hour or 45 minutes, the wine, all the fruit just evaporates and goes away. Whereas if you had poured it very gently out of this old bottle of wine, it could last you all night long. Because if you over agitate a delicate wine, it's going to break apart and kind of the fruit will go to the heavens, as they say. And so rethink that process about decanting. But there are good reasons to decant. Young wines, like I said, most wine on the store shelf now is meant to be drank. If you're drinking big, heavy, young cabs from Napa or a 3-year-old Nebbiolo from Italy, it probably needs a little bit of air. It needs some agitation to get going. And so I always suggest before you just reach for the decanter, pour a little bit in the glass, give it some time, 15 minutes, see what you think about it. Is it really tight? Is it something like, oh, I had this yesterday and it was better? And then go ahead and decant it, give it a try. But once you've done that, you can't go backwards. All right, myth number 4, never chill red wine. Why would you do that? Well, that's not true always, but it's mostly true. A lot of wines reds you're not going to put, into the fridge and drink them straight out of the fridge. But if you've liked to medium bodied wines, Pinot Noirs especially, they like a little chill. It can promote the fruit differently, and it just changes the nose. I actually store all my open bottles of red that I've had the night before. I put them in the fridge and take them out the next day. And being impatient, I probably drink at least the first glass of all my reds the second day a little cold. And I just think it's kind of fascinating. But, you always talk about ideal temperature for wine. In a summertime in Minnesota, 90 degrees is not an ideal temperature for red wine either. So keeping a bucket of ice on the boat for any red wine just to help it stay a little cooler is not a bad idea. Myth number 5, screw caps always equal bad wine. Nope, also not true. But this one really is complicated. Screw caps do give us the impression of cheap wine. That's true. And we all love the romance of the cork. And the more expensive wines, you can't imagine spending $500 for a rare wine and then just, the cracking the cap off and pouring it. It doesn't have the kind of romance that corks do. But in all the winemakers I talk to, almost every single one of them is trying to move away from corks because they're more interested in how they can preserve the sanctity of the wine over time. And the bottom line is that screw caps or similar enclosures that are synthetic will do, generally speaking, a much better job of keeping the atmosphere out of the wine and not having any of the flaws or the vagaries or the contaminations that corks bring to wine. So it's a complicated discussion in the wine industry. It's in the retail industry. There are those who want to move away for scientific reasons, but they also understand that the wine buyers aren't interested in buying a bottle of Chateau Margaux with a screw cap. So it doesn't mean bad wine. It just means it's a choice. Myth number 6. I've never burned a wad of hundreds, not yet anyway, but it kind of goes along hand in hand with that price point I was just saying about expensive wine. The more expensive, the better. That's a complicated subject too, and it's generally not a truth. It's a very subjective thing. We've probably all read, or you can Google and find a lot of studies that blind tasted a bunch of wine experts, and lo and behold, they picked the $10 bottle as being the best one. Didn't mean that the $1,000 bottle was bad. It's just that in that moment in time and their own subjective palates and everything, they liked what was in the $10 bottle better. Generally speaking, when you pay a lot for wine, you're paying for rarity, for scarcity, for how long that bottle sat down and aged, and all of the time and money and expense that goes along with that. And also just the perceived value of the brand of the name. There's a winemaker in California that every time they release a bottle, it immediately goes onto the gray market for thousands of dollars because they don't make much, and now it's become a cult to collect it. So you're really into the art collector stage at that point. That said, if you pay $5 for a bottle of Nebbiolo from Italy and you spend $20 and then you spend $50, qualitatively 100%, you're going to get better wine as you kind of move further up that scale. Myth number 7. This guy's clearly very happy about this wine. He's given it a 93-point score. We see 90-point scores all over. They put them on the bottles. They put them on the little signs in the shelf, and you see them in the magazine ads all the time. Do they matter? Maybe, yeah, sort of, kind of. They matter a lot to the winemakers and to the retailers. Why? Because we see numbers on bottles and we buy those bottles. And that's important for the winemaker to move those wines along. You got to ask yourself, though, do they matter to you? Points can drive up price. Points will make you believe that this wine critic, this wine expert is absolutely 100% right and you should trust him. And we all kind of walk into a wine shop going, gosh, I don't know much about this stuff. So points can be a good place to go, but you kind of have to decide, did it really matter in the end? Did I enjoy that wine? Robert Parker and his points system over the years completely changed the kind of winemakers profile and style in California to the point now where you're seeing them moving away from that. So points are marketing. So that's a good way to think about it. Do they matter? They can. If you know the wine and you've been drinking it for years and you see a point score on that wine, you might trust that. But don't go for points first. Learn a little bit more about the wine and don't let those kind of scare you into spending more than you want to on a bottle of wine. We're going to get close to wrapping up here. So just a couple of quick truths on pairing wines. I'm not sure I've ever had rosé and dill pickle together before, but she's trying it out, it would appear here. My biggest rule, and I said this in the cheese shop, is kind of drink what you want with what you want, with whatever you like. Try things together and you'll know, did I like them? Did I not like them? If you like them, don't care what anybody else thinks. Go ahead and do it anyway. There's nothing wrong with that. We don't have to be wine and food snobs about it. But there are some truths, and I'm not going to give in on these. French fries and champagne always go together. Just count that as a plus. Head down to Manger in Bayport and have Mike and the crew do you some duck fat fries and champagne, and that will prove the point, and you will never go back. In fact, champagne and potato chips do really well. There's just something about fatty and salty and good champagnes really do come together nicely. And then one last tip on food pairing is very sweet desserts and very dry reds are rarely a good idea. One of my favorite TV personalities who thought he was learning about wine, he was convinced that for a big French pastry that you needed a big dry red wine to kind of punch it in the teeth. And he had a 4-letter reaction as to what the two tasted like. There are always exceptions. You know, cab and chocolate can be fun. But really, generally speaking, if you've got a super sweet sugary pastry and a really dry red like a Nebbiolo, probably not a great idea. But again, you know, if you like it together, more power to you. You just have to trust me on that one. All right, guys, I'm going to turn it back to our hosts. I'm Chris. I'm the ambassador at Domacin Restaurant, Wine Bar, and Wine Shop. We're downtown and 2nd and Myrtle, and you can find me in the wine shop most days. We open at noon, and then my colleague Dennis is there in the evenings, so you'll find me there Tuesday through Saturday from noon on, and we'd be happy to see you. Come down. Everything in the wine shop is currently 20% off, and I'll make sure I extend that to anybody that said that you saw us today online, and we're helping out with the Stillwater libraries. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Chris. That was some amazing presentation, a lot of information. I'm glad to know you've never burned a ton of hundreds like the one image there. As a banker, that would drive me batty to actually do. And then knowing that when I go to the store, that when I go to buy a bottle of wine, yeah, that's really meant to be drank right away. I am glad to hear that I don't have to try to guess that correct aging there. So thank you so much for imparting your knowledge to us. You know, if we can get the slide brought up here, we've got a handful of books that you might be interested in checking out. You know, there's the Tasting Wine and Cheese, an Insider's Guide to Mastering the Principles and Pairing. Of course, if you're looking for traveling, there's California Wine Country. Maybe you're looking How to Love Wine, a memoir and manifesto. You know, clearly we all love to support local stuff. So Minnesota Winery Stories, Minnesota Wineries, Wines, and Winemakers. If you're thinking of traveling or you want to have that mindset of travel, Tasting Italy, a culturary journey. Of course, there's the Wine Bible, Wine Folly, the Essential Guide to Wine, Wine Girl, Obstacles, Humiliations, Triumphs of America's Youngest. Similar, and you know, we'll happily send you the full list after the event. So I really want to thank everybody for attending today. You know, we hope that you've enjoyed the program. Chris, thank you once again. We look forward to seeing you virtually again, and hopefully at a live event soon. You know, we'd love to see you in person. Clearly, like I said earlier, your health is very important to us, though. So thank you for taking the time to spend it with us virtually. Stay healthy, and thank you once again for all your generous support, and have a great evening.